I'm Nia Shanks of Lift Like a Girl, and in this video I'm going to explain some common squatting mistakes and what you can do to correct them. One that's less common but sometimes happens is someone says that squatting hurts their neck, and the reason for this most of the time is simply the placement of the bar. So you want to make sure you can easily find your C7 spinous process. It's that bump at the base of your neck. Sometimes people have the bar resting on that. That is why their neck hurts. Do yourself a favor, make sure the bar is below that, and that most of the time solves the issue of neck pain. The other reason you could experience neck pain when squatting is if when you're coming back up, you're looking up and hyperextending your neck. So what you want to do to fix that is try to keep your neck neutral when you're squatting. So a good way to help ensure that you do this is to just find a spot and stare at it. Some people like to look 6 feet in front of them, some people like to look further out, 15 feet. Just find a spot you can focus on, and that way you'll keep a neutral neck when you're squatting, and that takes away the problem of hyperextending your neck and hurting yourself. The other common problem that people make, and they say it hurts their knees. Squatting hurts my knees. Usually it's squatting incorrectly that hurts somebody's knees, and the main culprit for that is not making sure that your knees track in line with your feet. So the way you correct that is making sure when you squat, if you recall from the previous video, we set up with our heels about shoulder width apart. Again, you can bring the center out a little depending on what's comfortable for you. Toes pointed out slightly, anywhere from 15 to 30 degrees. Again, depending on what's comfortable for you. Too many people, when they squat, they don't pay attention to what their knees are doing, so they just drop down and their knees do this. Their knees are inside their feet when they squat. That's what causes knee pain. So what you want to make sure you do when you squat is make sure that your knees are tracking in line with your feet, both when you lower down and when you squat back up. If you're not sure if you're doing that, have somebody watch you or record yourself squatting, have the camera in front of you, and make sure that your knees are tracking in line with your toes. So that's usually the reason knee pain happens, and that's how you can correct it. The other reason you may experience knee pain when squatting, some people have their toes pointed straight forward, and that can cause pain. And again, that's usually solved by having the toes out slightly, as was instructed in the video on how to squat. The other reason somebody's knees may hurt is if they let the bar get out of that nice vertical path over the middle of the foot. Some people, when they squat, they come out like this to where the barbell is either over the toes or further forward, and that makes their heels come off the ground. And that can be why your knees are hurting. So to make sure your knees don't bother you when you squat, make sure your knees are tracking in line with your toes when you lower down and when you squat back up. And make sure that the bar is traveling in a vertical line over the middle of your foot. So, and some people ask, well, Nia, when you squat down, your knees come out over your toes. Is that bad for your knees? It's not bad for your knees, and everybody is a little different depending on how far their knees come forward. This depends on your limb length and even torso length as well. But as long as your feet are flat on the ground, and you're also sticking your butt back a bit, and the bar is traveling in that vertical path over your midfoot, your knees are going to come forward a little, and it's perfectly fine, because the only other option is to really stick your butt back like this if you want a vertical shin angle, and that's just not going to happen. So the knee coming forward is fine as long as you're applying those other cues. The other issue is some people say that squatting bothers their back, and sometimes this is due to hyperextending the back and squatting like that, where you have this really gnarly arch in your back. That's going to make it hurt. A good way to solve that is to really focus on keeping your back neutral and rigid and just not letting it move at all when you're squatting. So the way I like to make sure that happens is when I get the bar on my back, get out into my stance, I push my chest out just slightly to help get my back locked in position, and then when I squat, I keep it locked in this position the entire time. So once I lower down, my back stays nice and rigid. It's not moving. I'm not hyperextending it. I'm not flexing it. It's just staying in that nice tight position. And that's what you need to do. A few other mistakes that people can make, one is simply rushing through the warm-up sets, thinking about just getting to their work sets to get the actual workout done. That's a huge mistake because the warm-up sets give you an opportunity to hone in your technique, to make sure you're keeping your knees in line with your toes, to make sure you're keeping your back nice and rigid, to make sure you're squatting to the proper depth. So do yourself a favor, perform your warm-up sets with purpose, with focus. Make sure everything is moving correctly and that it feels good. Act like this bar has a crap ton of weight on it. That way you have to mentally prepare yourself for what you're about to do. Because if you just kind of half-ass the warm-up sets and just go through them to get them done, when this bar is loaded, your mind's not really in that place to do what it needs to do. So a really good way to approach all of your sets is just treat each one like it's a work set. From the way you set up the bar, everything. Everything should be a routine. So I'll kind of explain that here. This is an empty bar. Even if I was going to squat, 135 pounds or whatever the heck is going to be on there, I'm going to treat it like it's a heavy weight regardless. I'm going to get my hands set in the same place every time. I'm going to approach the bar the same way every time. I'm going to duck under it the same way. I'm going to get the bar in the same placement on my traps. I'm going to get my upper back tight, take one step back, get my other foot set, push my chest out slightly, and then squat. And then I'm going to take one step, two step back in, and get done with it. Have that same routine for every rep. It just really helps get your mindset in the right place. So those are some of the most common mistakes people make when squatting. So if the movement just doesn't feel right to you, you may need to play with your foot placement a little. You may need to turn your toes out a little more. Play with these things until it feels good. And then also record your sets. See what's going on. See how you're squatting. See if you're squatting to the correct depth. See how your knees are tracking. That's really the only way to find out what's going on, and then you'll know how to fix it. So those are some of the most common mistakes people make with squatting and how to correct them.